Is it possible to travel with a zoom lens just like this and leave all these prime lenses behind? Because I can just add that creamy bokeh later on. Lightroom just released a feature that adds depth maps and artificial blur to your images after the fact. So I went on a trip and left all of my prime lenses at home. So for this photo, we're gonna take a shot of Cody. It should be pretty easy for Lightroom to figure out what is the foreground and the background because there's 2 planes of focus. So we're gonna shoot one photo at f2 and one photo at f16.
Cody, you look like you just told someone a really big secret.
Once you've updated your Lightroom to version 13, there's going to be a new option on your side panel here called Lens Blur, and it's got a little thing beside it that says Early Access. When you open it up, there is a checkbox that says Apply. Once you hit Apply, it's going to take a couple seconds for the effect to apply to the photo. My Mac is an M1, and it still takes a couple seconds, so I'm assuming it's using quite a bit of processing power. As soon as the computer's finished thinking, we've already got a blurry background, and at first glance, this looks pretty convincing. There's a little slider here, and we can make the background more blurry or less blurry. There's no increments of f-stop or aperture, what these would represent, so we're just gonna have to guess. I mean, without zooming in on these photos, this looks pretty convincing. Zooming in, I would say this did a much better job than portrait mode would do on your iPhone. Okay, so for this example, we're gonna try and see what bokeh looks like in Lightroom. So I'll shoot Cody at f2.8, and we can see there's bokeh. And then we'll switch it to f22. Doesn't look great. Good luck, Lightroom. Bokeh is one of those elements that is created in the lens while shooting, so I'm quite curious how Lightroom is gonna deal with it. Here's a photo we shot at f22 and applied the lens blur. And right away, we've got some bokeh in the background. Let's crank that up to 100 and see how that looks. I think somewhere around 80-ish looks similar to our reference photo shot at f2.8. Looking at the image that was shot at 2.8, the natural bokeh has some irregularities and some randomness to it, whereas the one shot at f22, everything looks pretty uniform. But I wouldn't really care if the two of these weren't side by side. In my understanding, you can actually change what your bokeh looks like when you're shooting by using different lenses or by how many aperture blades the lens you're using has. Let's crank the blur up to 100 and see what these options for the bokeh can do. These are kind of cool and give the image a different kind of quality. Let's try this on the image where we had the actual natural bokeh, the one at 2.8. Yeah, it doesn't work as well in this example. Something else that's cool is we can use this focal range slider at the bottom and move it to the right side, and we can actually change the focus of the image to the background. To me, the foreground blur does not look as convincing as the background blur looks, but we can do that. We can also play with the focus a little bit by dragging this guy right here. Okay, so for this, I'm gonna try and add a foreground element and a background element to see if Lightroom can figure out the difference between the two. This is not the best frame.
The only thing this video is featuring is your bad posture.
Do you think there's a better foreground element I can add than that, Jay?
Maybe like literally anybody else alive in the photo. I feel like Chris as a model is kind of like gluten-free bread. Get away from me.
Hey, buddy.
It looks like you might have tricked Lightroom in this example because this pillar that was in front of Chris appears to be beside him. So when I shot this, I just shot it on my Sony camera. Lightroom is just using the information that is presented on screen to try and map what is in the foreground and background. Whereas if we were to shoot this on something like the iPhone, there is a LiDAR sensor, and that's kind of like sonar, where it's giving the camera information of what is actually closer or further from you. So let's take this blur to 100, and it looks like the background blurs, but the foreground element, like this beam that was in front of Chris, stays in focus because the computer thinks that it's right beside Chris. Let's zoom in a little bit and move the focus around a little bit. And it looks like we can move the focus to the back of Chris's head, not the front. That's pretty cool. And if we move it to the background, this blur on Chris looks pretty unrealistic. Let's change it back to the front. If we click the visualize depth checkbox right here, we can see with color where Lightroom thinks that the foreground and the background are. Purple is the background, and that's on the right-hand side of the chart here, and the yellows are in the foreground. For this composition, I want to take a photo of a human subject, strong background, and then a foreground element in front of the subject to see if Lightroom can figure out how to actually bokeh the foreground element in front of the subject. We'll shoot one of these at f2, and then one at f22. On this f22 photo, let's apply that lens blur. And things are not looking good right off the bat. If you look in this top left-hand corner, Lightroom is confused by these branches. Thankfully, Lightroom has given us the option to mask our image so we can tell it's what's in the foreground or in the background. So I find it's easiest if you press O or visualize depth so you can kind of see like what's in focus or not. And you can click focus or blur, which is kind of like plus or minus the mask. And you can override what Lightroom thinks is in the background or foreground. So let's tell Lightroom that this top corner is actually in the background and it made a mistake. Without touching anything else, I think it looks decent, but these foreground elements do not look as blurry as they should be right out of camera when I shot them at 2.8. These are completely different shapes of color.
I also want to try shooting a subject that is not human to see if the AI in Lightroom can figure out what the difference is between the foreground and the background. So I'm going to shoot this cool film camera with Matterhorn in the background. 2.8. Oh. Are we in these people's photo? There's also this machine right here that can take photos of people. It's incredible. This place is a tourist trap.
Apparently it doesn't matter if you are human or not. Lightroom was able to figure out what the subject of this image was. Even though I shot this at f/22, I still had my focus selector on and I did put it on the camera. So maybe in the metadata, Lightroom knows that this is actually my subject, but maybe it doesn't. I think these look very, very similar, and if you showed me these, I would not be able to tell the difference between the two of them. Am I ready to throw out my prime lenses? I don't think so. Lenses that have a lower aperture don't just blur out a background even more, they also allow more light into the sensor of your camera to have cleaner, less noisy images. You probably noticed on all of these images that I shot at f/22, they're pretty noisy. Lightroom can do a great job of cleaning up that noise, but it's not perfect, and it is just another step that I need to do when editing. Lightroom did not do the best job in every situation of understanding what was the foreground and what was the background, especially when there was objects closer to the camera than the subject. Not all of my prime lenses are f1.4, so I can see myself using this on my cheaper prime lenses or my zoom lenses that are like 2.8 to help sweeten the image and just enhance it a little bit. I also think it's great that I can use this on any image, not just any taken recently. So I can apply this to my past images and enhance those. What do you guys think? Is this just a gimmick, or is this something that you could see being useful in your photo editing process and something that you can use on a regular basis? Thanks for watching to the end of this video. My name's Davey. I've got a whole bunch of other videos on my channel that are similar to this that may interest you.